afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Babes with Books this month. We're really happy to have you guys join us. This is me and my other two babes joining us to talk about books. And we are talking about, I know, right? I froze. I was like,
that's okay. This is
on.
Maya.
Right, okay,
one
so
of the babes.
we're doing this.
This is Shauna. Hello. And I'm Leslie.
I feel like I'm like outing ourselves.
We are your babes.
They
know our first names.
Yes. This month we decided to do some books that we have wanted to read for a while, or on your TBR pile, your to be read pile. I use a website or app called Goodreads, and so I've been using it for a while. You can keep track of what you've read, what you want to read. It's a really good community for finding other books or different things like that. I really enjoy using Goodreads. But I've been using it for like 6 years now, and I had some books on my to be read area since I joined in 2012. So I decided that we needed to read something that we'd wanted to read for a while. I thought would be a good choice, and so that's what we did. So who wants to start with what they read? I think yours goes way back to high school.
Oh my gosh. Well, it does and it doesn't. So interestingly enough, I use Goodreads as well. And so I picked a book called Far Seed to read. And this one goes back for me because the very first book in this series came out in the late 80s, I believe, and it was called Earthseed, and it was the very first book that I ever read with my tutor because I was a very reluctant reader and I didn't get reading, and so I read Earthseed with my tutor, and then I would say about 10 years ago now, I think it would be about 10 years ago now, I found out that there was a sequel to this book called Farseed. So it went on my Goodreads. It was, again, I went back on my Goodreads, and it was like the very first thing I ever put on my Goodreads account. So I thought it would be fitting to read that. It came out in 2007. So quite a few years later. So it didn't. It's not like it was a sequel that had come out way back then. So that was interesting to find out as I was reading it because I did some research on it. So that's the one I read.
Okay.
Do you want to know what we felt, or do we want to all?
Why don't we introduce and then we can kind of chat about how we.
What'd you guys read?
I read The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna on my Kobo here, and it's a historical fiction about World War II, France, when the Germans came. I don't know what it is about me and historical fiction, especially about World War II.
I've been reading it since I was like 8 years old.
Lots. So I actually had this on my list from a couple of years ago.
You're a history major though, weren't you?
Yeah. A couple of years ago, 2016, when I first went on Goodreads as well. And it's funny that it was on the list from that long ago, and I'd forgotten all about it until everyone was raving about. A bunch of my girlfriends at work had read it over the Christmas break, so I was like, oh, perfect. So I'll read that.
Was that the one with the two sisters?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I read that one too.
Yeah.
Okay. Couldn't recall because I read a few.
What about you?
I read a book. I put it on my list in 2015, so 3 years ago. It is Practical Magic. It's by Alice Hoffman. A lot of people know this title because it was a movie that was really popular in the 90s. It was with Nicole Kidman and Sandra Bullock. And so I think I hadn't seen the film, but somebody must have mentioned it to me, or I must have found out that this popular film was a book, and it just sounded kind of fun and interesting. It's about sisters. I have a couple of sisters, so I'm usually a bit of a softie for those ones. And so I put it on my list, and that is what I chose to read.
As soon as I saw that you had read that one, I went on my to be read list. Thank you very much for building up my to be read list.
Yeah.
So what do you guys think about to be read lists in general? How long are they? Do we ever get to them? And based on what we went back to, would you recommend going back to your to be read list of things that you thought you wanted to read 7 to 10 years ago?
Well, so I put something in front of me here that I've had on my list since 2012, and I obviously didn't choose that this month. Middlesex by Jeffrey Ugendes. I found when I was going through my to be read list to choose something for this that I think I put a lot of things on either quickly without thinking. Either I've heard of them and I just put it down to remember, and in the end when I go back, or my reading tastes have really changed. I went through, I think everybody did, Hunger Games and what else was out around that time. When that YA boom happened, if you look at my to be read list for like that year, it's just filled with like YA titles. But I can't really read them that much anymore, I find. I think that's just changing as a reader. So I think it's interesting to go back through. I think you can find a gem.
Read Practical Magic? Did you?
Yes, that was one of the ones, so I chose it, and I still wanted to read it, and I quite enjoyed it. It's a really great book. It is about two sisters who were raised in a magical household by sort of older aunts, and then it grows up with them, and the book is based during a time, sort of, there's been a large sudden tragedy in their lives, and they have to kind of figure out who they want to be as adults, what they want to embrace. They have to come together as family. It was a lovely story for family, for love. It had some really lovely whimsy wound through it. I really liked Alice Hoffman's writing. She had some really neat descriptive writing. There's a couple of ones that really stand out. There was this lilac bush, and then there's some toads that come out, because, witches' toads, they are going to come out. But the toads, I just felt like goose flesh, kind of thing, because her writing was lovely that way. It just really pulled you into that place. So I really like Practical Magic.
She's a really beautiful writer.
I would put it on your list, actually. It's really great. It came to my attention because speaking of sequels, she published a sequel this summer to Practical Magic, Alice Hoffman. So since that came out, because it got a lot of news, it's kind of been buzzing in my head, and I think that's why I went to this one.
So fun facts while we're talking about to-be-read piles. If you don't remember the books that you've heard on the show, you don't have to go back and watch the show over and over again. We do have a blog. It's called thebabeswithbooks.wordpress.com, and you can follow us there, or you can find us on Alexa, and every week we'll send you a recommended read based on what we've talked about in the show, as well as a few little surprising nuggets of things that we've read. So check us out on there if you want. What did you read, and would you recommend it?
Oh, definitely. It's one of those books, and that's what everyone was raving about after Christmas. It's one of those books that's really hard to put down, and I've only had a couple books, and they're all historical fiction, that have been like that for me, that you just get so involved with the characters and trying to find out what's happening next, and empathizing with them, empathizing. Okay. Anyway,
Now, was it last month you did the other World War II? When did you do The Light Between Oceans for Babes with Books?
that was
A month or two ago, because you didn't love that one, hey?
I didn't know.
So World War II fiction, you're saying Nightingale over this one.
Oh,
Okay, awesome.
hugely.
That's good.
Yeah. And talking about the to-be-reads, I'm one of these people that have stacks of books in my house, so it's not just
Oh dear.
online in my Goodreads.
Let's face it, we
thing.
all have a to-be-read bookshelf, not a to-be-read pile.
Yes, my husband gets mad at me all the time, but I'm like, I haven't read
My
that
husband
one
does
yet.
not, because my husband has a bigger to-be-read bookshelf than I
Yeah.
do, so
My husband has
I don't
that
get in trouble
shelf.
there.
But anyway, but he actually reads them more often than me.
My husband just keeps giving me books.
That works. That
Good
works too.
husbands, good husbands. So
I go into my Kindle and there's like 6 new ones. I'm like, oh my gosh, no. No.
It's overwhelming sometimes.
Yeah.
Right?
I know.
my problem with my to be read is I don't necessarily choose them for myself. I pretty much all of them when I was going through it were recommended by either you guys or my sister
Yes.
or a couple of my online friends, and that I really, really value their opinions on books that they've read.
So
and
actually,
they've
that's a
done
really good
really
point.
good reviews and stuff,
When you guys are putting stuff on your to-be-read pile, do you prefer books in the end, when you can kind of think about everything you've read, the stuff that comes off your to-be-read pile that has been recommended by others versus the stuff that has been recommended or that you found yourself? Do you tend to have your own reading tastes satisfy you, or do you get a lot of satisfaction by other people's recommendations?
What about you?
Mine is usually recommendation.
You're good with recommendation.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can see you. You're a take things in and enjoy things that way. Yeah.
I have a little bit of both. I do definitely, everything I read comes from some kind of recommended read, whether it be online or on Goodreads or some kind of list. Because everybody reads for a different reason, I do try to figure out why they liked that book first to see whether it's something that I too would like.
Yeah.
What about you, Maya?
What about me? My to be read list. I tend to add things that I find on my own. I do a lot of, it's kind of my little hobby. I like to find books that I'm going to read and what's coming out and what's getting good reviews. It's my favorite part of magazines, and it's, you know, I have a few websites I visit weekly. So my list is rather populated with those choices already. So it's I think my to be read list is a bit of a gift to myself. I like to scroll through it and see what's coming out, and like
I can see you're much more
so-
analytical than I
Yeah,
am about
So
So-
just so you know,
reading
if you
this.
recommend something to Maya, she's probably not going to read it.
No, well, so there. I have found some gems from other people, 100%. I totally have. And also, there are times where certain people I know are very well versed in certain areas, sci-fi and fantasy, or one person that comes to mind reads mysteries voraciously, and is just amazing at describing these books that she reads. And every time she describes them, I'm like, oh, I need to write that down. Like, that sounds amazing. And there are times when I want a mystery. You know,
So
I've
she's
read
a good
lot of,
recommender.
She's amazing, yeah. But there are times when I've read fiction and I've read a romance, and I'm like, I just want something like gritty that kind of scares me at night, and I will often go to something that she's recommended.
Mood really has a lot
yeah.
to do with what you've decided to pull off your to be read pile as well.
Yeah.
Or sometimes
I
you
think
just
so.
get fed up with reading every single Philippa Gregory book.
Yeah, like you just can't always go
They're
to
all
things
the
on
same.
your to be
Yeah.
read list in that way,
So
right?
if
So
I
you have to
read another dystopian fiction, why I'm gonna.
Yeah.
Yes, so I don't think that I read as many things that are recommended as maybe other people do, but that's, like I said, it's just because it's my own little happy place, my to be read list. So
Speaking
yeah.
of dystopian fiction YA, that was kind of what mine was about.
Oh,
there you go.
Yeah, so my book was Earthseed, and as I mentioned before, Farseed. As I mentioned before, Earthseed I read way back in high school, and I put this on my to be read pile around 2007. It's been sitting there ever since. And because it was a YA, I kind of was like, well, do I want to read it? Do I want to come back to it?
Yeah,
You know,
YA.
is it worth it to go back to your to be read pile after so many years? And kind of like what you were saying before, a lot of times I'll go and I'll be like, what? I don't even remember finding that
is
book,
that
but
about?
clearly someone recommended or I found it on a list and I put it on there, and then I take it off. So I'm okay with weeding out my to be read.
Again, that's another
Yeah.
happy time for me. I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, what should
Yeah.
I take up today?
Exactly.
I read that. Why is that even on here?
Yeah.
So, but this one was a good. I'm glad that I went back and read it. It brought me back to that first book, which I still really love and would recommend. And this was shortly after the main characters from the first book are grown up and they have their own children, and they have been transplanted on a new planet, and they are trying to survive and kind of repopulate the human population.
Like a fun dystopian sci-fi.
Yeah, well, this one is less sci-fi. It's a lot more just an adventure, Lord of the Flies type thing.
Okay, so you're not getting that journey into space feeling.
No, there's really no space. There's a few like futuristic things that they split up into two colonies, and there's one group that has more of the technology, but they're reluctant to use it because they figure it's going to break down at some point. So they're trying to survive without it. And then the other group, Ho's group, has decided that they don't need the other group, and then they get sick, and they're having a lot more trouble surviving.
Sounds kind of classic.
Yeah,
In that-
it's
in
very
that,
classic juvenile
genre.
fiction.
Yeah.
I wouldn't recommend an adult read it. I enjoyed it because it brought me back, but it's definitely written at a juvenile level, and but anyone, I guess 8 years old to 14 years old would probably really like the
Oh, yeah.
series. So
Nice.
definitely recommend that.
Do you know if the first one's still available? Is it
Yeah, absolutely.
okay.
Yeah.
just because you had said it was older?
Yeah, and there's a third one in the series. I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head yet, but at the end of this book, you find out that there's a little bit of a change in some of the newer generation, and so it
Oh, you
goes a
think it's
little bit
gonna go
further
into-
into the new generation of humans, which is kind
Okay.
of neat.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I had said that it's kind of a classic dystopian, and so classics always come up for me on my to be read list, and so I thought I'd ask you guys: do you put pressure on yourselves to add certain things like Jane Austen or Charles Dickens or Dostoevsky or Tolstoy to your to be read list? Because I think a lot of people do. There's always those little like top 100 books. How many have you read? And like you go through and you check them and you're like, oh man, like
D.H. Lawrence, I could see the
and there's a lot of newer classics in that vein too, like Fahrenheit 451. I put one out here on the table that's on my to be read list. The Douglas Adams underneath there. I haven't read that. Hitchhiker's Guide. That's often on things. Do you?
I know so much about you.
Yeah, I like Stephen King. I haven't read. Anne Rice. I haven't read. So like there are a lot of authors that I even consider classic in this day and age that I often will add or think about feeling like I should, pick up if I don't have something else necessarily on the go. Do you feel pressure to add those to your to be read list?
Is it pressure?
It's not really, well, I guess, yeah, some of them, because I think I should read more classic YAs as kind of what because I try to recommend books to students at school.
Oh, okay, so you try to go back to
so
that
I try
genre.
to go back to some of that, because sometimes they get tired of the same old same,
Yeah.
because it seems like a lot of YA is the same. So I've gone back to a couple. I'm actually reading, well, The Golden Compass isn't classic.
Oh,
in that,
See, no,
Whoa!
it's classic.
Golden Compass is one of my favorite books ever.
See, okay, so
so then that, yeah,
So
is that
this
a classic? Is that a classic?
this comes
I
to
don't
my
know.
question. We were talking a little bit off camera about this, but what makes a classic? Because some of the
Just
stuff
about
that's
lost my mind there.
classics. Some of the stuff, no, I
agree.
personally don't force myself to read classics, but what is constituted as a classic?
Okay,
Because
personally,
there are-
I'm going to offend Shauna here. Personally, I feel like Philip Pullman is a way farther better writer, which obviously they're better speakers probably too, since I can't use English, than Jane Austen. Like, Jane Austen is kind of like, honestly, Jane Austen would be
Mediocre.
Sheldon Harlequin in this day and age, in my opinion.
Yeah.
She's not, like, they're just good old English books.
So what makes
And they're just
what
romances.
made these books get on the classic list? I guess that's
there
my
weren't very
question,
many of them.
because there wasn't very many of them and everyone had to read them because that's all there was. Well, that's like a dumb reason to make something a
no,
classic.
and even though there were a lot of so there were lots
It
of
is.
books. There were lots of books. But these books, I think something that makes a classic is a story that resonates with a lot of people. Now, Jane Austen resonates because a lot of people want love in their life. They're about family, they're about love, they're about finding yourself quite frequently, they're about and so I think that's why they stand the test of time as an example.
And it is true because a lot of the classics are very much about relationships, human stories, family, and that type of thing.
Yeah.
Whereas something like The Golden Compass, it's fantasy. Why I personally think it is absolutely a classic, but it's
Really
not
discussion.
necessarily something that's going to resonate with everybody out there.
But I don't think classics are either. Like, I
Well,
don't
you
think
just said it was.
well, okay,
Backpedaling
sorry.
now.
No, you're right. I did say that. No.
Classics
so
are hard
then
to read.
Why else are they? Why else?
What
so
else
that
makes a
doesn't
classic?
fit in because I feel that there are classics that even like not considering Golden Compass, like I said, Fahrenheit 451 is always on. Douglas Adams is quite frequently on those 100 novels you should read in your lifetime lists. And those are definitely fantasies and
I
sci-fi.
think the definition of classic is changing as well, and I don't necessarily think for the better. And I'm just gonna throw this out there, but do you guys think that 20 years from now, the definition of a classic will be a book that was made into a movie?
Oh gosh, no, I hope not. Because no, better not be.
No. It's just not allowed
This is
to
a
be,
good
so,
question
like,
for
no.
our viewers. So if you're
No.
listening to us
No.
right now and
No,
you
no.
have some ideas about what makes a classic, or even you want to recommend some books for us for our to be read pile that Maya probably won't read,
I'm always like
Pick on Maya.
the
Just
witchy
pick on
one
Maya
of the
today,
group.
yeah. Anyways, she's the babyest. Okay,
Hang on, I had an idea in my head. Oh, talking about so I asked the classic list. To be read piles. Do you also add the book before the movie on your to be read list? So last night we went and saw Ready Player One, and my husband just about wouldn't come because he hadn't read the book. So it was like it was not a good thing in his opinion. Whereas I've really come to understand that they're kind of two different things. We've talked about this before, and if I see one before the other, I'm only going to gain something from the story on either side. But do you feel like that's a to be read must do before the movie?
I used to think so because I was like, no, you want to know everything about it and it will enhance, right? And then I would come away from the movie a lot of times thinking, oh, but they changed this and they changed this and they changed this.
Well, they always have to miss things.
And then you get
Always.
and since I guess over the last couple of years I've kind of changed my view more like what you were saying, like last night with Ready Player One. There was a lot of things changed, but I think the stuff they changed I understood. I felt that they enhanced the story with the changes
that could work
they
in the movie.
made.
Yeah.
Well, you just went to a movie that is a classic story.
I did.
Sorry, we didn't know things.
The movie that you guys just went to see, my brain is
I just went to
blank.
Ready Player One last night.
No, but
I go to
Tomb
a
Raider.
couple weeks ago. No, not Tomb Raider. The one with
Black
Oprah.
Panther.
The one with Oprah.
Oh, really?
Wrinkle in Time.
Wrinkle
Now,
in
in
Time.
that
That's
case,
a classic novel.
interesting. So
It's a
I
very
guess I was a
classic
little bit more of a
novel.
stickler in my head because my kids and I did that as like a novel study. So we did read the novel and then saw the movie.
I love you, Oprah, but no. I did not like that movie. I'm sorry. I did
But
not
had
like
you read the book
some
before?
of the acting. Yeah, long time ago. Yeah.
So and in that case, I don't think it was the story though. That was the movie. That's what I've heard. But it's not just Oprah. Again, Oprah's awesome.
Yeah.
Mindy Kaling, like the Mindy Show, is awesome.
I
Super
love
fun.
Mindy.
Legally Blonde, again, pretty fun.
Totally.
Ladies, I just don't think they
were flat.
like when I saw them cast. I just thought, what? No, like they're amazing. They're these ethereal creatures that transport these people through dimensions and universes and worlds and.
Anyways, we're talking about the movie more now, but
Yeah, well, that
So,
was the
yeah,
point I was
book,
making was
movie,
about
yeah.
the classic
Wrinkle in
book.
Time
The
is
Wrinkle in Time is a classic.
Yeah, it's a good one.
I don't think you have to read the book before you watch the movie. I think as long as you go in and
What do
and
you do,
not
Shauna?
think- Yeah.
Book
I
before the
prefer
movie.
to read the book first.
Okay. I actually prefer to see the movie first, if I have a choice sometimes, because I find myself more disappointed by the movie if I've read the book first.
Yeah, I've heard that actually from a few people. My
Yeah.
husband thinks that too.
Yeah, I can go in and then I can read the story and feel like, oh, okay. Like the only time I don't love that is when I can't get a face out of my head, and I don't when I'm reading it, I don't necessarily agree with that face, and they don't match up. That's the only time I'm like, well, that doesn't work. Like, and then you spend the whole time in the book searching to find that actor.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
That's only when I get lost there, but yeah, good old to be read lists.
Well, next month we're talking about graphic novels, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yay, graphic novels!
Sorry,
A little
I
distracted.
had an alert.
So yeah,
I'm so excited for graphic novels. My
Why?
excitement level. We have really delved into this world in the past few years in my household. My husband found them first. Really enjoys like kind of your classic comic style. But my kids, I read an article saying that they're really great for beginning readers because you can link that story with the pictures. So they're really great for kids that are starting out reading. And we delved into that world and we haven't looked back. We have read so many graphic novels in my household. I can't keep up with them actually. And then myself, some really interesting. I went into it thinking like comic books, but there's some really interesting like literature out there that has been made into graphic novels
I'm
or
super
written
excited
as a graphic novel style.
to bring you mine next month. So.
Yeah. I haven't found one, so if you guys have
haven't
any
either.
great suggestions for a graphic novel that I might not have read, give us a shout, and I'd love to.
Yeah,
Hear
continue
your
the conversation in the comments down below. We will respond. We will keep the conversation going.
Make sure you also check out our blog if you haven't checked out our blog. It's Babes with Books.
thebabeswithbooks.wordpress.com.
Yes, because we're recommending books there weekly, and you can listen to it on your Alexa as well. So it's a good one to listen to while you make dinner.
Good. Well, thank you for joining us this month, and we'll
And
see
thanks,
you.
Pandora's, for hosting us again.
As always, Pandora's is great.
See you next month.